for the people in your lives and feel good. And my colleague Jonathan and Kirsten, we're going to talk today about how music can help in that mission. It's something that we all love. There's many different kinds out there. There's many different ways to enjoy it. And again, I think for me, music, one of the things that makes it so special for me is it's such a sense memory, right? So you can hear a song and it can instantly take you back to a moment in your life that was good or weird or scary, but whatever it's doing for you, it takes you right there. So it has that ability to alter your mood, to create a space, a sanctuary, whatever it is that whatever sort of environment that you want to build for yourself. So we're going to talk about that. And the way that we're going to do it is talk a little bit about some concepts in music, but we're going to do it by bringing, Scotty mentioned, if that's what it is that kind of brings you there. So thank you for sharing that. So I want to introduce Jonathan Pierce, my colleague at Revel. So Jonathan has probably one of the most interesting jobs I've ever heard of. He heads up our experiential R&D group. So he's the guy that takes the art and the science and really brings them together to understand what it is that we need to do to stay so true to the artist's vision and create music that everyone's going to enjoy in their vehicles. So he's going to take us through some of these listening terms. He's going to talk a little bit about chocolate. But Jonathan, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Dawn. And hello, everybody. And thank you for joining us for this discussion. I like to think that music might be somewhat of a natural fit, I think, with a lot of the topics that are going on today. I can't think of any scenario where, I'm trying to better myself, whether it's reduce anxiety, exercise, going to a spa, where there's not some sort of audible connection there, right, with music, essentially. And I must say that I was talking to my wife about her relationship with music, when she's doing a lot of self-care and relaxation. And she said, I can't imagine doing any of those activities without having music by my side and having the freedom to choose, what type of sound quality or music I'm listening to during certain activities. Be it if I'm doing high intensity workouts, I might be listening to something that's a bit more heavy bass, more dynamic, and then something, maybe more serene and calming, maybe when I'm driving from site to site, say in my Lincoln, or if I'm at the spa getting a massage or something like that. So I really think that music really fits in well with what we're all discussing here today. And I also know that maybe talking about sound quality can be a challenge for a lot of people. And, to many of us, we certainly enjoy music, but if someone pressed you to say, what specific attributes do you like about sound? It might be a bit harder for you, a bit more challenging, right? So I guess what I'd like to do is focus on some terms that maybe people are familiar with and maybe break down, what's contained within some of those terms, using instruments and obviously using everybody's favorite chocolate, hopefully as well. And again, I guess I'd like to start by just, saying that the terms like bass, mid-range, and treble are terms that all of us seem to know. And certainly in your Lincoln vehicle, you're going to find those what we call tone controls, right? And many of us have probably adjusted those tone controls at various times. And we might have an idea of what's happening when we move those knobs. But what I'd like to do is really dive deeper into each one of those categories and maybe give you some examples of what instruments might fall within each one of those terms, and then tie that into a piece of chocolate as well. So is everybody ready to have some fun? Yes. Okay. Well, I guess the first thing I want to focus on is the word bass, right? And I think that's probably the most common term that people associate with sound quality. Bass certainly is what drives a lot of the emotion in the music. It's what we feel, right, in the music as well. The car has quickly become, I think, that place for us to enjoy music in a more visceral and personal way, right? Because not only do you have now 20, 30, whatever speakers around you, and let's be honest, you don't have that many speakers in your home, but you actually feel the music, right, as well, right, when the bass hits. But let's be honest, a lot of people are kind of subjective about bass. Some people like more bass, some people like less bass. Sometimes it depends on the music that you're listening to as well. And to me, this is my chocolate analogy here. To me, this ties a bit into the dark or extra dark type of chocolate. It's a very bitter type of chocolate, right? But bold and rich as well. And I think it's also a very subjective piece. So if any of you have any dark chocolate there right now, I'd encourage you to go and actually, take a bite of that and just think about kind of the sensations that you're getting, from eating that and tasting that. And, terms like bold and rich are terms we actually use to describe bass as well. Right. And again, I also say that dark chocolate is something that might be a bit subjective, much like bass response would be. Some people, again, like more kick drum and maybe more bass guitar in their music. But some people might like a little bit less because, let's be honest, if you have too much bass in your music, it might be drowning out a bit of the mid-range and maybe even the treble or the clarity and the detail in your music. But there's no right or wrong answer with that. Bass, again, is something that Revel has tuned into the system to give you the freedom to be able to enjoy how much of that response that you want, that feeling, that emotion of the music. And again, I would just tie that back into maybe more of like a dark chocolate theme.
Yeah, that sort of base, for not to throw a pun in there, but the base of a dessert or a flavor, that sort of dark, richness that kind of anchors everything in there. It's the same with music.
Yeah, I almost would say it's a heavier type of chocolate, right? And if I'm thinking about the way bass makes me feel, it's a heavier feeling, right? Because I can feel it physically. I can feel when the bass hits it actually travels through my body. And, there's been multiple studies about the effects of chocolate, especially dark chocolate, and the effects of music, and how there's a lot of neuroamine, chemicals that share, right, a lot of those same experiences. And it's, chemicals like dopamine, that flood our brains when we like something. And it's that feeling of love, that feeling of connection. And, the reason why we're using chocolate to describe these things is not because we just like to eat chocolate, but there actually is a physiological reason as to why we're kind of tying in some of these concepts with the chocolate as well. All right, so moving away from the bass, I like to talk about the mid-range and the treble, which might be some concepts that, again, you're familiar with because you've seen the terms and maybe you've interacted with the audio system in a certain way, but maybe you're not really quite sure what is changing. So we're moving to the mid-range, and the mid-range is really where the majority of your musical content is going to be stored. And what I mean by that is, think of all the instruments that you're familiar with in the world, essentially. The majority of human-made instruments essentially fall within the mid-range frequencies. So instruments such as percussion, meaning drums, guitars, piano, vocals, a lot of woodwind instruments, brass instruments, the fundamental frequencies of those instruments fall within the mid-range. So the mid-range has a lot of heavy lifting, right? And subsequently, our ears are also the most sensitive to those upper mid-range frequencies. And this is where I like to kind of tie in the chocolate analogy, being more of like the semi-sweet type of chocolate, not too dark, not too milk chocolatey, but something that kind of has to do a lot of the glue between the really dark chocolate and the milk chocolate, so to speak. It must be very dynamic. It must be very complex. It's going to introduce a lot of different types of flavors, like flavonoids, that might even give you like a fruity sense of taste with it. And this type of chocolate has to be nimble enough to kind of represent the dark chocolate side, right? That rich and bold side. But also when you kind of get up into the lighter side of the chocolate, more the fruitiness and the sweetness, that has to also kind of represent a bit of what mid-range is trying to do in the frequency side. Yeah. So that mid-range speaker in your car has to reproduce some of the punchiness of the bass, but also some of the nimbleness and the clarity of maybe say the vocal or the flute going on in your music as well. So the mid-range has a lot of responsibility. That type of chocolate that kind of lies within the dark and the milk chocolate also has a lot of responsibility, I think, in being that glue between both extremes. And the weird thing about this type of chocolate and mid-range is adding just a little bit more sweetness, or maybe say like a little bit more low-end presence to your mid-range will really change the dynamic. So just little tweaks within the flavor structure of that type of chocolate, as well as that frequency range of mid-range, just little tweaks will change a lot. And again, that's because I believe that our ears are just much more sensitive to mid-range frequencies than say bass or treble frequencies.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. I'm going to pick up on something that you said about adding and tweaking, and it sounds a little bit like a recipe to me. And that is when I think about, your team and the engineers at Revel that are actually creating these sound systems, like the one we do for Lincoln vehicles. Talk a little bit about sort of how do they do their tweaking to make sure that mid-range and that bass and that treble, that the balance is there and that it's really sounding the way it should.
Well, I'm glad that you asked that because being in car audio now for 17 years, I must say that when I first came into the industry, I thought everything relied on the quality of the speaker itself, right? So that certainly is we'll say the sexiest part of the system because that's the first thing you see. You open the door, you can see the grill in front of you, maybe with a badge on it. And that's your first impression of the car, the industrial design of it and the presentation of the speakers. But that's really just what, I'm sorry, Kristen?
I was just going to say, and it does look so good in the Lincoln Aviator that you might sort of like, you notice that and then you think that's all there is to it, but really there's so much complexity to what Revel has put in the vehicle.
Right, right. The industrial design, the aluminum grills, right? I mean, that's, again, the first presentation you see in the vehicle is something luxurious, something that you know is going to be better than maybe what you've experienced before, right? Just because you've walked into something a bit more, we'll say ornate, if you will, right? So that presentation is very special. But I think many people, again, put a lot of stock in just the components themselves. And what Don is really alluding to here is there is a human element to your Lincoln system when you buy the Revel option. So these engineers are called assistive systems engineers or acoustic engineers, which is kind of an obvious way to describe their job responsibilities. These individuals actually will go and visit the Lincoln plant and sit in the vehicle for up to, say, 4 weeks, tailoring, tuning, and tweaking the system. And when I say tuning and tweaking, it doesn't mean physically actually pointing the speakers and screwing in things or whatever. They're actually going to plug their laptop into the amplifier of the system, which is essentially the brain, and they're going to be able to control each speaker individually in that car. And they're going to be able to adjust things such as the bass, the mid-range, and the treble for each individual speaker, make sure that they are all what we call time aligned, because sound obviously travels through the air, and we can measure how sound arrives at our ears at different times. And these individuals are essentially going to tell certain speakers to delay or stop or go ahead and open the gate to make sure all those sound waves arrive at your ears at the same time. And that's something that you're simply not going to get with a non-branded system. They just don't have the horsepower or the capability to do those types of customizations. And I think what's important about this is, again, if you buy some really nice speakers for your home, more than likely someone's not going to come in and actually, tune your entire room for you and tell you, hey, this is the sweet spot, sit here. But when you buy a Lincoln vehicle, you get that customization, right? You get that tailored individual approach to make sure that every seat has been calibrated to make sure that all the speakers are arriving at your ears at the same time. You're getting the full effect of the sound quality and the clarity. And again, I think a lot of people maybe overlook a bit of that customization when they're looking to buy a branded audio system such as Revel.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, I think, that many people don't realize, but in a way that's good. I love that people can just get into the vehicle, turn on their sound system, hook up whatever source they want, and it's going to sound great. So I know, Kirsten, you're in and out of many different cars all the time, and some might have the premium audio systems like Revel, others may have bass systems. Are there differences that you've heard, or is the experience of one versus the other?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that because I don't know if I really put it enough in my blog post. One of the things that sort of struck me the most profoundly, because I'm such a huge fan of rolling the windows down when I'm driving and I'm alone, wind in my hair, and the music's probably going to be pretty loud. I didn't have to do that in the Aviator with the Revel sound system because of the way, and Jonathan, you'll be able to speak to this obviously more from a technical standpoint, but because of how well the speakers are designed for the driver, I could have the windows all the way down. The wind was pretty loud, and yet I never had to really turn the volume of the music up high because I was surrounded by the music. And so even though the wind was creating noise too, the music didn't have to compete with the wind or try to drown it out. It was just coming at me in every direction so perfectly that it was there. I could hear it, and it didn't really matter, what was happening with the open window. And honestly, I don't think I have ever experienced that in a vehicle. So that was one of the most immediate things that I just got it. We had gone through our Zoom with you before, Jonathan, and you had sort of warned us about what we might experience. But when I got in the vehicle, it immediately clicked, because that was one of the most noticeable things that I just did not have to crank the volume all the way up like you might have to in a system that's not engineered like Revel engineers things.
Right, yeah. I think that's a testament to the amplifier power, essentially, right? That you have the freedom to blast your ears out if you want to. But certainly we want to give you the option, the freedom as the consumer, right? To choose the volume that you like. And we talked about the Calm app, and I think that if we're going back to, the quiet flight, the sanctuary aspect of your Lincoln vehicle, those cars have been designed to be very quiet for a reason, to block out the world's stresses. So that, I think, unlocks and really allows the audio system to shine through. And when you partner that with, say, the Calm app, or maybe your favorite podcast, right? Something that's meant to be more serene and relaxing. Blocking out all the external noise is very important. And that amplifier in the Revel system is going to give you a pleasing experience no matter what the volume is. And you said something key there, to where other systems you've actually had to turn it up to try to make it sound better. Maybe to get some of the richness of the bass we talked about with the dark chocolate, right? Maybe some of the punchiness even in the bass. And we've designed this system to give you those emotions even at lower or moderate volumes, so you don't have to actually crank it up and potentially even hurt your ears, right, to get the sound quality that you want.
Or I remember when I was younger, there was always the joke that, like, turn it up too soon and you're going to actually blast the speakers, as in, like, explode.
Sure.
Component of the speaker system. And you don't have to worry about that really anymore because of the way systems are engineered, but it's still something I think about even as 30 years later, and that just wasn't ever a worry. And to go back to your point again about never having to really blast the volume, when all the windows were closed and I did want, instead of more of a fun experience, more of a sanctuary experience, again, I still didn't have to crank up the volume to, like, I was listening to a podcast discussion. So multiple speakers, different tonalities, all kinds of variation in who was speaking. It didn't matter who was speaking. It came at me from the system so perfectly that I felt like I was sitting in the room with the people speaking on the podcast. And I could perfectly hear everyone's intonation and everyone's voices, with this just incredible feeling of me being part of it. And that's just not something I've experienced with other sound systems and other vehicles. It's not to say that Revel is the only good speaker system, but you're doing something that other people just are not.
Yeah, well, it's perfect what you said there as far as making it personal. Because people who create music for a living, the engineers and even the podcast engineers, they have a vision that happens there in the studio, right? That's really where they paint their picture. And then they pass it off to a company like Revel, and they say, please recreate this picture, color for color within the spaces allotted, and then we represent this to my audience. And it's a big responsibility of an audio manufacturer to essentially be the third party, right? To kind of be the courier from the artist to their audience. And it's very unique to other artistic industries, if you will. But it's really the goal to be transparent, right? To lift the veil. Let the magic happen, essentially, right? The magic was created essentially in the studio when the artist or the interviewer, interviewee, were creating their dialogue. And we are simply facilitators of that magic, right? I think that's when you know that you have a great audio system, when it's almost effortless, right? When what you described was, it just started coming at me natural. It wasn't strained. I didn't have to go in and start adjusting a bunch of things to make it work for me. Yeah, right. And I think that's a sign of a really good, transparent audio system, and something that our goal is at Revel.
Yeah, and I think it's just wild to think about how far we've come, right? Like, again, I'm not going to assume ages and decades with everybody here, but the first car I ever drove had, a pretty subpar radio and maybe like 2 speakers in it, and you got what you got, and that was it. And I'm sure we all enjoyed it, but these days, and to your point, Jonathan, like, the best sound system that probably 99% of us will ever own in our life these days is going to be part of our vehicle. And I think it's important for people to know that, like, when you're shopping for a vehicle or when you're looking for a car. That's why I love, Scotty and Kirsten, your team, what you do. And when you're writing about the experience in a vehicle, it's more than just the engine horsepower and how big are the tires. And I always say this to you, Scotty, my big example, it's where do I put my purse, and how do I adapt this vehicle to my life, and how can it help me? And I really believe that music and the audio system in your vehicle is part of that. So I encourage everybody to, when you're thinking about a vehicle, or you have a vehicle that maybe you don't listen to music as much as you should, just try out that system and really enjoy it, because we're worth it to steal a line from another brand. It's something easy to do, and that really makes a huge difference. So Scotty, I know you said you're getting some questions in, so do you want to
Sure.
hop in with one or two?
Some really good comments and some really good questions in the chat. So if anyone has questions for Jonathan and Dawn, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll bring them in. But Dawn, it's so funny, you mentioned back that when you got your first car, and you kind of get what you get when it comes to a sound system. And the other alternative was to go to one of these shops where they would install a sound system for you. And remember those? And you don't really see those anymore, because that was like it was an invitation to thievery. Either you get ripped off, like they tell you it's the greatest thing, and then 2 weeks later the speakers are crackling and fuzzy, or somebody just breaks in your car to steal your stereo. And right?
Happened to me. I didn't steal it. It happened to me.
Right. And I remember thinking, what's the point of spending all this money on a great sound system when it's just, people would just walk through parking lots and look for windows to smash. So I'm personally, in my car, my own personal car, I'm grateful to have a really good sound system that I can turn it up. We can all sing along. We can all, enjoy this music together. We can play iPod roulette, and it's not something that I have to worry about, and it fits in with the design of the car, so it doesn't doesn't stick out from the dash. It doesn't have like speakers that don't go with the back deck or in the door panel.
Yeah. We've all seen those.
Like all the retrofitting that these companies
I remember in college when, now this is going to make me sound like I don't actually know anything about audio, but some component of the audio system, Jonathan, took up half the trunk. Would that have been the subwoofer or the?
Yeah, you had a big subwoofer enclosure with a big amplifier probably attached to the side of it. Yeah.
So it's like, we don't have to do that anymore. But we were packing the car to drive to college, and it was like, we don't even have enough room for the luggage because audio is so important to us that we had this big subwoofer. But it's like the practicality just went out the window, and in favor of experience. And you don't have to do that. And one other thing that occurred to me when we were talking about all of this is that there's also this aspect of safety that's so built in with Revel, because when you get in, the sound is so great already on the sort of whatever the options are is it stereo mode that's sort of standard when you sit in the car. And so that's so great on its own that I think a lot of consumers aren't even going to have to mess with it or start going into the options and customizing, because that's going to be good enough for them. And so there's this aspect of just, you get in the car, you drive, and it's already awesome, and you're not going to have to be messing with things while you're driving or while you need to pay attention to the road, like, oh, I can't quite hear the bass enough or the treble or whatever. In other sound systems and other cars, you might want to constantly be playing around with that, and that's going to affect your driver safety. But in the Lincoln with Revel, you don't have to do that if you're probably the average consumer. And then if you want to be able to customize those things more, the controls are so well done with Lincoln and Revel working together that, again, it doesn't really affect safety because it's so easy to customize with that huge screen with the buttons on the steering wheel. It just strikes me as that's another aspect that is so great about it. It's a safe system to use whether you are going to customize or whether you don't. That was a long, sorry.
Yeah,
no, it's the whole, we want it to be as easy and pleasant as possible for everybody, and that's to point out the partnership that we have with Lincoln. There's so much synergy there, and we really share that same point of view around the role of music and how it can add to your driving experience and make your experience with your vehicle even better for you, because you're so connected to that. It's pretty cool. So Jonathan, back to the chocolate. I know we've got one more. We haven't had the milk chocolate yet, and that's my favorite.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah. So
I wanted to hear about that.
Sure. So I feel like treble gets a bit of a bad rep, right? And that's being, again, if we go back to what types of instruments fall within each one of these terms, treble doesn't get a lot of love there. It's mainly going to be cymbals, triangles, higher note type of instruments, right? And again, in the way that instruments have been made by humans, we don't have a lot of things that fall directly within the treble range. But a lot of what the treble represents is the detail or the air and the space in our music. And for example, many of you right now could clap your hands, and depending on what room you're in your house or wherever you're watching, you're gonna get some different like reflective properties. They're gonna bounce off the walls, the floor, windows, things like that. If I clap my hands in my bathroom versus my closet, I get a very different kind of echoey delay sound. And that's where a lot of that is contained, is within the treble frequencies, the higher frequencies, right? Now, again, it doesn't get its just due because it's a very important part of the music, much like kind of milk chocolate, right? So this is where I'm gonna pick on milk chocolate just a little bit. A lot of chocolate connoisseurs will look at milk chocolate like, yeah, that's kind of, you know, passe and not really my thing. It's more of like the mainstream people. But if you don't have that sweet, you don't appreciate some of the complexity of the dark chocolate or the boldness of the extra dark chocolate. And I think the same thing is true with the treble. If you don't have it, you're going to miss it, right? Because it's going to make things in the mid-range sound very dull. The vocals, like a female singer, right, who primarily lives in that mid-range, a lot of what we call harmonics that come from her voice are going to exist in the treble region. So if the treble's not there, it's going to sound very muffled and very veiled, right? And it's certainly not like the artist intended. And a special thing we have in the Aviator, if we can talk specifically about that vehicle, is we have what we call 3D technology. And I mentioned how the treble, which essentially comes from the little tiny tweeters in your car, that's where the space in the music, the air, if you will, exists. Well, we're going to take those little tweeters and put them actually above you in the headliner. And we're going to create more of like a 360 type of omnidirectional sound for you. And what I want to draw attention to is that artists will sometimes choose to record their music in a certain environment to actually capture that space and those reflections as part of their art. Some people might choose to record in a very large wooden auditorium. Other people might choose to record in a small lounge area. And capturing all those reflections and that treble sound essentially really becomes another brush for them, right, when they're going and painting, you know, on their canvas. So what we're doing with that Revel 3D system is capturing, right, those reflections, the space in the music, and putting that up above the occupant. So almost transporting you into a place where the recording is happening is the idea behind that.
I'm going to break in here really quickly. Rachel Wisman said, I am clueless when it comes to how to use bass, treble, and mid-range in the car. Do you want to explain just a little bit about, not only, we've talked about the role that they play, but what should we be playing with to understand how to get that best mix?
Yeah, we'll start with everything at default, right, at 0. The way that our engineers have customized that system, going back to traveling to Lincoln to sit inside the car and tailor it, they have tuned it to make sure that the Revel sound signature, if you will, is represented at default. But we understand that sound is very subjective, kind of going back to the discussion with bass. People like more or less bass. And there's really no right or wrong to this. I would say put in a piece of your favorite music that you've heard over headphones, over Bluetooth speakers, maybe other speakers you have at home, maybe you saw it live. And really just sit back and focus on the music and think about, gosh, would I like a bit more of this instrument over that instrument? And I can give you some quick hitters here as far as what falls within the bass. So think of low note instruments like kick drums and bass guitars. If you move into the mid-range, think more about the vocals in the music, or maybe piano or guitar. And as you move into the treble, think about, again, kind of more the higher pitched instruments or the air and the space that exists in the music. And don't be afraid, I think, to really boost one up really high and just listen to what actually changes, what instruments get louder when you do that, and then back it back down to 0. And then just kind of play around with those levels and determine what type of calibration speaks to me, right? What do I want out of this experience? And that could be driven by the mood you're in that day. It could be driven by the type of music you're listening to. You know, Kristen talked about driving with the windows down. Sometimes that means the bass can kind of escape the cabin and we might lose a little bit of that impact. So maybe you want to consider bumping that up a little bit as you're driving the car. But I would say just set it back to default, listen to music that you know very well, and don't be afraid to go to the extremes one by one and listen to what's changing and listen to those individual instruments and find really that balance that really speaks to you personally and the experience that you want.
Can I answer too from practical experience?
Absolutely.
Those 3 modes of sound that Jonathan, you'll be able to describe better. One of the things I did is I picked 4 or 5 of my favorite songs, and I listened to each song on all 3 different modes. So, Juice Newton's song on stereo mode, on the other 2 modes, and then which one did I like with that song in particular? Which mode was the best for that song? And that sort of helped me start to get into how the different settings might come.
Yeah. That's perfect because not all music is recorded the same. So for people out there watching, there aren't really any standards in the music industry as far as like how much bass should be in, say, an Elton John song versus, say, a T-Pain song, right? So that is, again, part of the flavor that goes into creating the music is the producer, the engineer, and the artist choose in that environment how much of that balance they want to come out in their music, and they use it as a part of a way to express themselves. But it doesn't mean you as the audience maybe want to hear it in that way. So, maybe even though T-Pain puts a lot of bass in his music and that's how he wants to project himself as an artist, doesn't mean that you as the audience maybe prefer that. And so you might just want to go in there and maybe knock the bass down a little bit if you feel it's too much. Or maybe the inverse is true where you're listening to a Neil Young song and maybe you'd like a little bit more of that kind of physical emotion that comes from the bass, and you might just want to crank that up a little bit. So Kristen, that's a great point, is all music is not recorded the same, and maybe listening to several selections to understand that dynamic between the songs might give you a better idea of maybe how you want to customize your system based on the type of music you listen to and maybe just what you personally prefer.
And there's also the great Revel playlist that you provided the Girls Guide to Cars community so that we could listen to songs that your engineers thought really showcased what you did in the vehicle. Those songs are great. They really helped me. And in fact, it was funny, the Bubbles song by Yoshi Horikawa. I mean, that's gonna be my song now whenever I get in a new vehicle to test the sound system, because he has so many different elements in that song. I mean, it's a testament to his genius, but also it's a testament to the genius of Revel, because you hear every little element of that music. Every instrument he used, every synth he used, it all stands out individually. And I don't know that there's that many songs that you really experience that. And so, as a consumer, leaning back on you, the brand, to say, how can I best experience this? And that playlist is just one element of how people, I think, can do that.
And you mentioned something there that I think we haven't touched on. We've talked a lot about the bass, the mid, and the treble, right? The beat and the melody of the music essentially is what we've talked about. You're referring more to where things are coming from, right? And how you can actually almost see, right, where that synth is, or where that wooden block is, or where the vocalist is. And this is something that I think is somewhat lost on today's decisions that we've made to buy Bluetooth speakers for our home. Nothing wrong with portability and convenience, right? But if we go back again to how music is mixed and recorded in a studio environment, they actually will record a single instrument or a single sound and then put it anywhere between left and right speaker, right? So you can actually say, oh, the guitar's to my left, and say this drum's to my right, right? So physically actually seeing your music is a part of enjoying, high quality playback as well. And something that we've tailored in that Revel system by putting all those speakers around you, but also time aligning, as we talked about earlier, all the waves arriving at your ears at the same time. And that allows you, again, to see, as the artist intended, where the instruments were supposed to be placed across your dashboard, and also maybe even coming around you as we talk about the audience mode and the onstage mode, right? So playing around with different types of music and how it was recorded and where things were positioned in the recording physically will have a very different effect when you start moving through stereo versus audience versus on stage. And again, it's really all about just finding that type of experience that really speaks to you at that moment.
I think I say this in my blog post, but on stage mode made me feel like I was sitting on stage with the musicians around me, and I could pick out every instrument and feel like it was being played, 2 feet from me, and still not have my eardrums blown out. I mean, it was I feel like I sound like a fangirl, and I'm not being constructively critical at all, but it's just such a great sound system. So.
Well, I'll pipe in with one little suggestion, that when you go shopping for a car, you take a test drive, bring your Spotify playlist or bring a flash drive with some favorite songs on it, and pop it in there and listen to it. I think our test drive, we feel so pressured when we go to a dealership, and we really need to, as Lori Rady was saying earlier, know what your boundaries are and don't let people push you past them. And one of them should be, when you're test driving a car, take the time that you need with it and play your favorite songs. Pick 3 or 4 songs that you can plug in and know that this sounds great and I'm going to enjoy this, or this needs adjustment, or maybe this isn't the sound system. Maybe I like the car, but I need a better sound system, because the last thing you want to do is, plunk your money down on a car that you really love and then not have that enjoyable sound system for all of your driving.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When not that less of us are commuting these days, but when the time comes and we're commuting again, I mean, it's so important to be able to do anything you can to make that commute better. Living in LA, believe me, I know. And the sound system in your car is one of those things that I think helps. And so, Kirsten, you were kind of talking, I loved, by the way, when you were fangirling out, just because that's kind of the way that I tend to think about it too. And I'm constantly having to reel myself back in and say, no, be a professional. But it's the feeling I think that music gives you, and the way that it actually can change your brain chemistry. There's been research done, lots and lots of studies. McGill University, which is the alma mater of lots and lots of folks that Jonathan and I work with, very renowned for their acoustics and psychoacoustics program, has done lots of studies about how, like, literally the beat of music can kind of change your heartbeat, kind of can match up, and it gives you tingly feelings, and really kind of works with the serotonin and the dopamine in your system, and changes that to alter your mood, and you can leverage music to, very much like we talked about earlier, with the folks from Calm and Lincoln about, taking that breath and kind of settling and centering yourself. Music can help with that. It can also get you pumped for a meeting or for a party, or, how we've all, been in the car either by ourselves, kind of focusing with certain songs, or with a group of friends, being very social and getting, jazzed up for an event that we were about to attend. I've got to, here I go. I've got to wield this back into a topic here. But so, I mean, both of you, Kirsten, are there instances of that are particularly memorable for you, or have you had a time where you've, taken that music and sort of what it can do for your mood, and use that to help yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think a great example is when I actually did this test drive in the Lincoln Aviator for the Revel system, driving back at sort of the end of my week with the car from Sonoma to Los Angeles. The wildfires had just started to break out in California, and I am sort of a new resident to the state, so the wildfires do make me pretty anxious, because I did not grow up in a state where that was the norm. Fire is not something that I fangirl over. It does scare me, and there was a lot of anxiety because I knew that I was going to be driving past and through wildfire areas. I didn't know I would be doing it for 9 straight hours, but I knew that I was going to be doing some of that. And so music was such an important part of keeping me calm on that drive and helping me to not panic, and also keeping me safe while transporting a part of my sort of mind and emotions out of the danger and just regulating my mood. And, artists like Mozart and Odessa, and there were so many sort of old favorites and new favorites, because I had Spotify and could just tune it to show me something new in this genre. The music was there, the sound system was there to just regulate my mood, and it did that so well, because let's go back to Mozart, like a good sound system that really highlights the majesty of his talent and what he could do with sound and music, that's so good for the soul. And with a good sound system and good music, it just it doesn't matter what's going on outside the car, because you know that inside you're safe and you're okay for now. And the sound system did that.
Very well said. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I think that's so true, that not only can you use it to regulate your, how you're feeling, but I find that personally, when I get into a rut where I'm just like not feeling excited about life, or feeling too pressured from things that are going on, changing up my playlist and putting some thoughtful things into it that will raise my heartbeat, that will give me some positive messaging, that will, help me to feel a little more, like the outlook is better. That maybe make me walk a little bit faster. That like all of those little things they really overall change your outlook. And it's almost, like you kind of lift your gaze and you see the sun and the stars, and you realize that it's not about this little problem in front of you. It's really about everything that's in front of you, all of that possibility and all of that opportunity. Jonathan's nodding his head.
Yeah, I mean, the power of emotion in music, right? I mean, of course, Dawn talked about the studies at McGill, on a more clinical level, but let's just bring it down to a level we all understand. I mean, imagine watching a movie without any music, right?
Oh my gosh.
The key moments, right? The key moments, the sad, the happy, those things. I mean, I think you can even go on YouTube and find clips where they've stripped certain tracks of music just to show you how it changes the dynamic aspect of that scene.
Yeah.
And again, imagine going to work out you forgot your headphones at home. You get to the gym, your headphones are at home. Do you turn around and go back and get them? Or do you just trust whatever the gym's playing over the overhead? And I think that's just a testament to how personal music is to us. And I think everyone would agree that music is important to them. Maybe we've lost a little bit of that emotional connection, just the way the industry has somewhat changed for the home environment. But through headphones, and especially your car now, right? This is really becoming the place where you can sit back and really focus on music, not just make it a soundtrack, just something that goes on in the background, but something that you sit down and focus on, even for one or two songs, and just see how you feel after you do that, right? I mean, see how you're either uplifted, right, or you feel less anxious. There are times I'll sit down on the couch with a pair of headphones on, and I'm looking to listen to maybe one song my friend recommended. An hour later, I've gone through, 20, 30, whatever songs, because the feeling I'm getting from now exploring new music, it just drives me. It's such a passion that I have. And I think many people would also enjoy if they just took the time, I think, to sit down and focus on music.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why we do what we do. And by we, I mean you, because you do it. I just get to talk about it, tell everybody the cool stuff that the Revel guys do, but it's awesome. But I do tend to go back and I think about it like a chef or a winemaker or a chocolatier. And you can enjoy, no piece of chocolate's going to be a bad piece of chocolate. You can have, kind of a basic Hershey bar, not to, I love Hershey bars, but that's its own thing. But if you grew up on that, and then all of a sudden you're tasting an artisanal piece of chocolate that has, sea salt and, some things put in there, the magic put in there from the person who made it and crafted it so carefully and uses ingredients that are the highest quality, that's gonna just take the scales right off your eyes. You're going to taste this chocolate. It's going to give you a whole new appreciation for what can be possible. And that's why, because people understand that experience, that's why when I talk about music and sound systems and, well, why should I spend the extra money for branded audio? Why should I seek it out? When I can just have every car comes with a radio and 2 speakers. It's really levels above, and the experience I think is so much more satisfying and so well worth it.
Yeah.
One of the things that's nice about the Revel system in Lincoln is that every Lincoln has Revel sound, right? There's not a difference. There's different standards. So there's a base Revel system, and then there's the upgraded premium Revel system that has more speakers. But when you get into a Lincoln, you automatically get into Revel sound. And that's not true with every other car brand. Sometimes they have, a base system, and then they have the premium system in the upgraded model. So, but that's correct. Am I correct on that?
So I have to say, like, I can't rattle off all the trim levels and off the top of my head, but certainly what I would say is, yeah, you're right in that there are two levels of Revel, Revel and then Revel Ultima. I believe across the lineup, but again, I'm not exactly sure what's on what trim, but what I would say to all of you out there is no matter, you know, when you're in the vehicle, look for the badge or ask your salesperson or look for that branded badge of whatever system would be partnering with that automaker.
Yep.
And for Lincoln, absolutely, it's Revel, exclusive partnership, great synergy there. And yeah, we love working with them and bringing great sound.
Yeah.
And that's the only place to hear Revel in a car is in
Correct.
Lincoln.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I'll add a little bit of a plug that the Lincoln Navigator, which is standard with Revel, by the way. So if you buy a Navigator, you're going to get Revel, whether it's tier 1 or tier 2 is up to you. But they recently won a JD Power Award for sound quality in that particular vehicle. So just a little bit of a, you know, raise the bar.
Congratulations. So I have a question from Nicole Brady, and she wants to know, with the resurgence of drive-in theaters, do you have any recommendations on listening in the car and maybe even, you know, opening the lift gate and that kind of thing? Jonathan?
Oh, sure. Yeah, oh, sure. Again, I think if you were to find yourself at one of those events, which I think are extremely cool, by the way, you know, Dawn and I talked about the possibility of this coming to the States, you know, a while back, and I'm so happy that it's actually here. So, but I think it kind of goes back to start from the center. And all too often, I talk to people who assume that when they hop into a car, maybe much like, you know, going to eat, how they immediately put salt and pepper on the food before even tasting it. And I would say any experience you go into, remember, all music is recorded differently. Every FM station is going to broadcast differently. When you go to a drive-in concert, how they're broadcasting that into your car is going to be decided by the engineer as far as the level of the bass, the mid-range, and the treble. So I would say go back to center, go back to default. So everything on 0, fade and balance, right, in the middle of the crosshairs, and start playing around, right? And knowing that you have the power over the audio system, right? Don't go with what's been assumed from your previous car or what your friend told you. You know, trust your ears and trust your preferences. And just listen to the music, take it in, you know, take a minute or two to digest the balance of all the instruments. And if you want more kick drum and more bass guitar, boost up the bass. If you want more vocal clarity, if you want more guitar, more piano, maybe more of the drums, boost the mid-range up. And if you feel like it sounds a bit dull, like things just maybe sound a bit more like veiled, like someone's talking, you know, through a cloth, then boost up the treble a little bit. And don't be afraid to play with surround sound versus stereo as well. I have another chocolate analogy here, and it comes from stereo versus surround sound. First, from a technical perspective, let me tell you that when you're on stereo mode, everything should be frontal, up on the dash in front of you. Think of the dashboard of your car as the performance stage where everybody is singing and playing their instruments. But when you kick on surround sound or audience mode or onstage mode for the Lincoln, those sounds that were recorded in front of you are now going to fan out and somewhat appear maybe over your shoulder in audience mode, if not even outside of the car slightly. And then in onstage mode, things are going to actually go behind you in the back seat of the vehicle. And again, there's no right or wrong with this. It's just, what are you listening to at that time? What's your mood? And what experience do you want? So I would say that's probably my best advice is start with everything at 0 at default. Feel empowered and control over your audio system to go in and start playing around with these things. You can always hit, you know, restore to factory settings and go back to the beginning, so you're not going to, you know, destroy anything. And explore, right? And see how the sound changes and try to understand what's changing and just have that conversation with yourself to say, you know, gosh, I think I prefer this over that, and I'm going to go with it. Just know that if you're going to open up the back of the car, which makes a lot of sense if you got the family and you want to do more of a tailgate, right, situation, you might lose a lot of the lower frequencies or the lower note instruments like the bass, just because it's not contained within the cabin as much anymore. And there's some really nerdy stuff we could get into with that is the reason why. But just know when you roll down the windows, open the lift gate, a lot of your low bass impact might go out of the car, and you might need to then adjust the bass controls in your car, just bump those up a little bit to get back to maybe where you want it to be.
Thank you. That's fantastic. And I'm with you, Jonathan. I love that drive-in movies are back. it's such a cool thing out of our past that is, I think, one of the benefits of this era. If there are many, there are not many, but that's one of them. So one last comment that I'll read from Joanna Geyer. She said, "The sound in my Lincoln is unlike any other vehicle I've ever had. I'm so thankful for this opportunity to get some insight and chocolate. The chocolate analogies are awesome. Who doesn't need an excuse to sample some new chocolates?" So with that, I will share that in the gift bags, everyone will get a sampling list and a sample of chocolates. So you'll have some chocolates and then a song list, playlist, that you'll be able to put Jonathan's advice to work and get that feeling, both the taste experience and the listening experience on your own after your gift bag arrives in the mail. So with that, I believe we have a winner to announce, and Connie has drawn the name. It's a random drawing among participants on the webcast here. And the winner of the Revel listening gift is Marta Miller. So Marta Miller, congratulations. We will get your information over to Revel, and you'll your gift bag will be in the mail. Congratulations. Thank you so much to Dawn and Kirsten and Jonathan for joining us to talk about creating that great environment in your car. And by the way, there is a playlist in the yoga chat that Abby Bassett made. If you would like to have a playlist to help you change your mood to calm and building strength, her playlist is there for you. And we'll include that in the chat here as well. So thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to turn it over to Lori Rady. Thanks, Lori.
Thanks, everybody. Right. Yeah, you bet.
Thank you.
Oh, gosh. All right. So thanks very much, Scotty. That was such a pleasure to listen to. And when we think about elevating our experience, the thought comes to mind of being in the present moment, right? To just be here now. Isn't that a beautiful thought? But how many times have you tried to be in the present moment, and no matter